Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. This Civ overview is all about the Burmese. Now they're a monk and elephant civilization, though as we'll see, those labels could have been pretty much anything except archers. I think it says a lot about the civilization that in my top 5 Civ ranking series, they've been brought up in comments on the Infantry and Cavalry videos many times. And I think the consensus would be that they deserve a spot on a top 5 unique unit or monks list as well. So are they just good at everything? Well, let's check them out. To start things off, the team bonus is that relics are visible on the map for you and your allies from the start of the game. I think we can all agree relics are worth the effort and investment to pick up. In fact, we know we should be getting them every game, and yet it's one of those things that's easy to forget about once the fighting starts. Seeing them from the start takes away the process of finding them and helps you remember to collect them, indirectly securing you more gold for the entire game. If you're a bit of a clever player though, this bonus also helps you guess starting locations. Dark patches on the map are good candidates for enemy positions since relics aren't generated within a certain distance of a town center. That's most useful in a 1 vs 1 if you're looking to get aggressive early or just scout what your opponent's doing. On the other hand, it can also be misleading. That's the joy of randomly generated maps. Unlike what you might expect though, once someone collects the relic, that revealed spot doesn't move with it. It's just their starting locations that have a permanently revealed spot on the map. Next up, their first Civ bonus is that all lumbercamp upgrades are free. In total, right off the bat, that saves 550 food and 350 wood. Already a pretty solid bonus, but keep in mind that more than half of that is coming in the Imperial Age. In Feudal Age, it's just 100 food and 50 wood. Double bit axe is a very common technology to get as soon as possible since it gives so much value, so alternately those resources free you up to get another eco upgrade as well, like gold mining or horse collar. That's also the same amount as 2.5 spearmen, or about 2 scouts worth of resources, giving you a bit of a military boost. Alternately, you could instead get an upgrade like men-at-arms for a similar value. There's a lot of flexibility in freed up resources, and it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. By early Castle Age, these savings are up to 250 food and 150 wood, which is roughly the equivalent of an extra building and 3 scouts that you could afford up to that point, which a generic civilization couldn't if they wanted to get the lumbercamp techs. Those are upgrades you should get at some point as any civilization, since together they increase your wood gathering rate by a combined 44%. The Imperial Age wood bonus is the most expensive and ironically the least important, since it costs more than the other two put together while increasing it the least. In total, you end up collecting about 58% faster over the Dark Age collection rate, even before adding in the effects of wheelbarrow and sappers. Everything considered, I think the biggest impact is in the early Castle Age, since that's a period where you're trying to put down town centers and get out villagers, as well as take advantage of your military power spike with better units, so your resources are usually stretched pretty thin as it is. It's easy to postpone bowsaw either intentionally or by forgetting, so there's peace of mind in just focusing on your strategy while knowing your long-term wood efficiency is handling itself, which I think gives a lot of practical value. I think we've all had a game at some point where we realize after an hour or more that we've missed some really basic eco upgrades and cringe to think about how many resources we lost. Their second Civ bonus is that their infantry get +1 attack per age, starting in Feudal. That sounds a lot like the Aztecs' Garland Wars unique tech, except it's free and starts working much earlier in the game, so I'd consider it a better version even if it only maxes out at +3. Keep in mind your militia are completely generic, but as soon as you hit Feudal Age, it's like an instant free attack upgrade, making men-at-arms significantly more dangerous. For example, picking off villagers goes from 8 hits to 7, which is enough to end up giving you an extra kill now and then. The nice thing is you can still get the normal attack upgrade as well and take them out in 6 hits. Think about how often you attack with infantry and can't quite finish a villager off. Suddenly, with Burmese, a decent portion of those normal close calls actually become successful. It also means they're going to have an edge over enemy infantry by usually taking them out 1 hit sooner. Now in Castle Age, it's even more interesting because at that point it's +2, and you have the Longswordsmen, which is a pretty rare unit to see online. That's because the Castle Age is usually dominated by crossbows and knights. Now crossbows in Castle Age are good against Longswordsmen, except maybe if you're the Malians with extra pierce armor, that's debatable, but knights, especially after Bloodlines, are just so cost effective against them that Longswordsmen just aren't normally a winning play. Even without Bloodlines, knights still end up with about a third of their HP left, with equal resources spent on both sides. There's other advantages that are happening here too, like faster movement speed for raiding, a more balanced cost of gold and food, as well as knights being better against ranged units. But even ignoring all of that and just mashing them together, we can see why knights are hands down the more powerful unit with generic civilizations. But the question is, how much does that change when you give Burmese Longswordsmen an extra 2 attack? If we do the test again with Burmese Longswordsmen, against knights without bloodlines, they can nearly hold their own, though not quite, and still lose convincingly against knights with bloodlines. That means while they do measurably better, I would say even with the Burmese attack bonus, Longswordsmen are still a questionable unit in Castle Age compared to other options. Now when it comes to champions in Imperial Age, they're up to +3 extra attack from the bonus, bringing them to 20, just one behind an Aztec champion. Now the actual benefit of this to your infantry really depends on what you're up against. You might think this is great for pikes and halberdiers, for instance, who should now be amazing against cavalry, but actually compared to a 32 attack bonus, an extra 3 attack isn't very impressive. To put some numbers to it, a faster attacking Japanese halberdier in 4 attacks does 148 damage to a cavalry unit with full armor. To get the same damage output from a Burmese halberdier in the same time period, it would need +12 attack, because it would have to be able to cover the bonus damage from the Japanese 4th hit. In fact, even with +3 attack, they end up taking out paladins in the same number of hits anyway. Likewise, it doesn't make a big difference against ranged units like archers, hand cannoneers, and scorpions, since the big issue there is in closing the distance. Other bonuses address that with more HP, more armor, more speed, or negating some kind of bonus damage. Looking at the Burmese extra attack in comparison, again, doesn't really do a lot here. The time the bonus shines is when there's no bonus damage or ranged advantages going on, and you're just in straight melee combat against similar units, like halberdiers or champion, at which point the Burmese become arguably one of the best infantry civilizations in the late game. The difference is particularly noticeable with halberdiers, given their normally low attack, and at 10 vs 10 against generic halberdiers, the Burmese consistently survive with nearly half their HP left. Against Vikings, who of course only have pikemen, Burmese do even better. Aztecs also miss access to the halberdier, which Garland Wars can't make up for in this case. These are normally solid infantry civilizations, and Burmese are just cutting them down. Even Japanese halberdiers don't win with equal numbers, meaning they'll need to rely more on skirmishers or something else to take effective fights. Now Slavs can go either way because Druzina is such a finicky tech that relies on the density of the battle, but with moderately sized groups, the Burmese can at least keep up, if not have a slight edge. The only civilization that can consistently beat them with halberdiers is the Goths, assuming that you give both sides equal resources and unequal numbers, which might not always be possible in practice with population limits. So while I downplay the effect of the bonus on halberdiers against cavalry, it seems obvious that they require a non-melee solution in the really late game, unless you're melee, in which case you have nothing to worry about. So overall, I think some of the commenters were onto something. The bonus just gives your infantry a lot of unexpected punch through the whole game, especially later on. You might be missing some of the traditional anti-infantry units, but this bonus almost makes up for that all on its own. Their last civ bonus is that Monastery techs are 50% cheaper. If you haven't checked the price of some of the Monastery techs in a while, that's a pretty big bonus. Assuming that you get everything, that saves over 1,400 gold and almost 400 food. Don't forget you're also more likely to find relics to help pay off your monk investment. If you're going for a monk rush, you'll prioritize redemption to convert buildings in siege, as well as sanctity for more HP. Already, you're saving about 300 gold for those two right there. If you want to throw in faster movement rate and the ability to convert enemy monks, you spend and save another 233. Obviously, in Imperial Age, you'll eventually want everything except for maybe faith, which is another 260. What that means is the bonus should be valued somewhere between 300 and 800 gold for a typical game that you go for monks, which end up being fully upgraded aside from heresy. Of course, it does have to be said that monks aren't necessarily everybody's favorite unit, but with so many discounted technologies, it's the perfect civ to start with if you're a little bit monk curious, since monk bonuses don't really get more accessible than this one. So those are their civ bonuses. It's easy to see why they're called a monk civilization with a good reputation for infantry, but so far we haven't seen much for the elephants or why so many people consider them a good cavalry civ. To get a more complete picture, let's move on to their unique unit, the Arambai. Looking at its stats, I think there's a natural comparison here to the Conquistador, as a high attack, low accuracy ranged cavalry unit. They're 80 wood and 60 gold, which is just a little bit more than a Mangadai, and unlike the Conquistador, don't cost food, which is nice to free you up for easier booming and researching techs. They do pierce damage like an archer and are upgraded by stable techs and the archer armor upgrade, but not fletching. They take bonus damage as if they were cavalry archers from anti-archer and anti-cavalry units, but unlike cavalry archers are not affected by Parthian tactics. If you know the Conquistador's upgrades, they're actually quite similar in a lot of these cases, though Arambai do benefit from ballistics. They're not quite as tanky as Conquistadors when it comes to armor, and compounding that, they only have the first armor upgrade available, which they make up for with higher attack and a faster attack rate. That puts their theoretical damage output significantly higher than what is already a very powerful unique unit. So what's the catch, and why do Conquistadors win with equal numbers? The catch is Arambai have low accuracy. To get a sense of how poor it is, a crossbow without thumb ring at its maximum range is 92% accurate. Elite Conquistadors at their max range are quite a bit lower at 76% accurate. Elite Arambai are 47%, and Castle Age Arambai hit infantry units just 32% of the time from their max range. Those are stormtrooper numbers. The elite upgrade does help a bit, but the point is a lot of their implied damage is actually landing harmlessly on the ground unless they're standing right beside their target. Now that explains their poor performance despite looking better on paper, and how I actually kind of rigged the test. Arambai and Conquistadors are basically evenly matched when put up close. Now poor range isn't actually such a terrible thing when you get enough of them and if you're against another large army, since stray shots become much more likely to encounter something, which they'll still do half damage to. In fact, you could argue it helps counteract the wasted damage from overkill to have such low accuracy, making it feel like an area attack when you have a lot of enemies clumped together. For example, one-on-one against an arbalest, the fight can really go either way, with a slight advantage to the Arambai. But on a large scale with the arbalests bunched together, the Arambai will always win against equal numbers, with about half their HP left. This also might be one of the rare cases where staggered formation can be a good call, to reduce some of that inevitable stray damage and hopefully magnify the effect of unlucky shots for your opponent. Now the elite upgrade is fairly expensive in terms of food, which your economy might not be geared toward since the unit normally costs wood and gold. It's definitely worth it for the better accuracy though, on top of a bit more HP, attack, and importantly one more pierce armor. That pierce armor is especially important given your shortage of archer armor upgrades. One thing I find interesting to note is that the Arambai has had a lot of patchwork done to it in the form of nerfs, with reduced speed and attack, as well as losing a natural resistance it once had to anti-cavalry archer units. The fact that at one point it was clearly an overpowered unit, I think also adds to its reputation. As for hidden attack damage, there's not a lot going on. They have a small attack bonus against battering rams, but not to other siege or even rams once they're upgraded. You can give them an attack bonus against buildings though, with their Imperial Age unique tech, Manipur Cavalry. That tech gives Cavalry and Arambai +6 attack against buildings. This is Age of Empires though, so all you can be sure of is that it's not actually a straightforward +6 in practice. It's 6 extra attack if your opponent hasn't researched any building upgrades. The problem is, as soon as they research masonry, it cuts it in half to 3 extra damage. That's a 325 resource tech, half negating one that costs over 1,000. Architecture further reduces that damage by 1, but keeping it at the same +3 bonus. The point is, if you never research masonry, it might be worth doing so now and then, especially against the Burmese. Also not stated, but important to know, is that against castles, towers, and walls, the tech does nothing. Don't go thinking that you can fight castles and other defenses with Arambai. The point is you're getting +6 as a best case scenario, and more likely +3 against non-defensive buildings if your opponent is diligent enough to get their Castle Age upgrades. One cool feature though is this applies to cavalry as well, and that elephants count as cavalry, which is a unit we haven't really seen a bonus helping yet. But speaking of the battle elephant, their other unique tech gives them an extra 1 of each type of armor. Now this used to be an extra 2 pierce armor, which admittedly was maybe a bit too good against archers, taking 320 arbalest shots to bring down. That's been reduced to a still impressive 160 hits instead of the normal 107. In terms of resistance to their major counters, this doesn't do a whole lot, as pikes and halberdiers still have their massive attack bonuses, and armor doesn't help much against monks. Good thing the faith technology is half price. You'll also want to make sure you prioritize the regular cavalry armor techs first, as they give a better price for the same effect. So those are their unique units and techs. You have a lot of choices in the mid-game with a mobile, high-damage unique unit, as well as a Castle Age tech that helps out a mid-game elephant strategy. On the other hand, you could ignore those and go for all sorts of early aggression, whether it's infantry, archers, cavalry, or monks, with a variety of direct bonuses, but also a solid underlying economy bonus that helps all of them. To get a sense of the large variety of options you have at your disposal, let's move on and take a look at their tech tree, starting with the archers. Things actually start okay in Feudal Age with their wood tech bonus, giving arguably an above average archer rush, but the tech tree really throws on the e-brake in Castle Age. They're the only civilization without at least the second armor tech, and also lack thumb ring, making the cavalry archers a questionable choice, especially with the superior Arambai available. Considering you also have some of the worst skirmishers in the mid to late game, as well as no arbalest or hand cannoneer, there's not a lot of good things to point out. I sometimes hear I don't give out enough Fs in these grades, so I'm gonna give them a C- for the archer range. Sorry guys, like I said, they're not completely useless in Feudal Age. That being said, archers are something you should actively avoid using in the mid to late game if you can. In contrast, and on a slightly better note, let's take a look at their infantry. This is actually one of the strengths of the civilization. You have all the blacksmith techs and upgrades, plus the attack bonus that scales as you age. The extra attack is actually quite good against other infantry civilizations, and Burmese seem to do quite well in head-to-head matchups, though keep in mind they're not really improved against their weaknesses, like archers, and the effect is diluted in matchups where they already have a large attack bonus. Overall, I'd give their infantry an A- as a solid option both early and late, with halberdiers in particular going to be useful against a variety of units besides just cavalry. And speaking of cavalry, let's take a look at the stable. All the technologies are there, with the only big thing missing being the paladin. That's offset a bit by being one of only 4 civilizations with battle elephants, giving them a nice alternative from a late game population efficiency standpoint. The Scout Rush is okay, but not great because of no Dark Age bonus, but you do have the savings from Double Bit Axe in there. The Night Rush is good, again, maybe not top tier, but certainly respectable. I don't mind the lack of camels, especially given how much you're pushed towards monks anyway, which can also fill that defensive role against knights just as well. Elephants can be good too, though you probably won't get their unique tech until pretty late in the game. If you're building a castle, you might as well make Arambai at that point. Following those things up in the late game, there's still a lot of variety, including fully upgraded hussars and cavaliers. Keep in mind, there's also the unique tech for more damage against buildings for all of these units. Overall, I'd say it's another A-, though keep in mind that's without any one incredibly strong stable option. They just do a bit of everything, which I like, but can also make it hard to decide which unit to use sometimes. Next up is their siege. Overall, it looks pretty good, even without any direct siege bonuses. The bombard cannon is nice, but most often you'll probably gravitate towards the mangonel line, since you'll find going for Arambai or infantry, you run into a lot of massed range units. The lack of siege ram isn't a big deal in this case, since where your capped rams might take out towns a bit slower, any cavalry you have will also contribute a bit more than usual. They feel to me like a B+, and while you won't base your strategy around siege, you'll also rarely feel like you're missing anything important. Moving on to the Navy, normally I see wood bonuses and get excited about water maps because I assume it'll lead to more ships. But this time I consider the most important part of it actually just that it prevents you from forgetting those upgrades. A lot of other civs wood bonuses end up saving significantly more in the feudal and castle age, whereas the Burmese are primarily saving food. For that reason, I wouldn't consider them above a B in the early game. For the late game, you also end up lacking a lot of Imperial Age naval techs, including the all-important shipwright. Bracer and two-man saw let you hit Imperial Age with a bit of momentum, but overall I just think a lot of civilizations are going to outpace you on the water. I'd say they drop to a C+ in the late game for an overall B-. Taking a quick look now at the monks, they're definitely top tier. Some people are going to like the Aztecs relic bonus better, but the potential for more gold doesn't really help if the Burmese player got them first. Likewise, Aztecs getting more HP for each tech is great, but Burmese again are probably able to afford them earlier. Ultimately, the Aztec monks have a higher cap, so I'll slide Burmese in with Saracens at Spanish at an A. Switching now to defenses, their towers aren't really anything special and they're missing hoardings, but the university is pretty good otherwise. Monks can be useful defensively as well, although they're missing some of the other units that can be nice in a pinch, like hand cannoneers, camels, or a quickly created unique unit. Overall, they're a solid B for defenses, but not really ideal for a defensive-oriented player. And wrapping up with their economy, you have all of the techs there except for stone shaft mining, which isn't a huge deal. Guilds is also nice to see for those really long drawn out games. Again, getting all the wood upgrades for free means it becomes a lot easier to prioritize farm upgrades, which indirectly helps save wood in the long run as well. Plus, longer lasting farms with more upgrades help you maintain your sanity and keep your stress level low by not forcing you to hear that sound we all hate. There's nothing worse than being in the middle of doing something so yeah, I'll give them a solid B+ for economy. So overall, I guess the big takeaway is that the Burmese are good for a lot more than just their monks and elephants. I'd really consider them more of a monk and raiding civilization, with the ability to get aggressive with infantry early, along with their unique unit and unique tech for cavalry bonus damage against buildings. Whatever level you're at, there's going to be a good option for you. If you're a more experienced player with good micro, then you have monks and Arambai. And if you're more of a player that just likes to wait until Imperial Age to attack and then just mash units together, the infantry and elephants will probably have more appeal. The main trick at any level is just working around your weak archery range and navy, meaning you'll have to be a bit creative sometimes in dealing with units like the Mameluke, Genoese crossbowmen, or on the water. Those are just my thoughts on the Burmese though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.